Pues buenos días a todos, ¿verdad? Como les había dicho, pues me complace mucho que estén aquí para aprender mucho de este tema, porque yo hace 6 meses no conocía nada de lo que trata, ¿verdad? Neurociencia y sociedad, y ahora pues estoy bastante interesada y espero que se dé alguna oportunidad en el futuro para continuar trabajando con esto. Bueno, me presento, mi nombre es Alisa Sosa, soy estudiante del programa de biología de UPR Aguadilla y también soy la presidenta del Consejo General de Estudiantes, que algunos puedan conocerme de ahí. Y como les dije, estoy bien agradecida de tener este espacio, ya que justo una de nuestras metas es llegar a estudiantes que vienen de universidades donde estos temas no son comúnmente identificados o muchos pues no hemos escuchado de estos temas anteriormente. Seré breve, pero les quiero dar un poco de contexto de cómo yo llegué a estar envuelta en estos proyectos. Yo comencé a trabajar con el Dr. Shen en noviembre del 2022 gracias a una propuesta para la creación de un centro Dana de Neurociencia y Sociedad en Harvard Medical School. Esto fue un proyecto piloto que fue liderado por el Dr. Shen junto a unos colegas, que es la doctora Teresa Williamson y el doctor Gabriel Lázaro Muñoz, que de hecho es puertorriqueño. ¿Cómo encontré esta oportunidad? Pues el profesor Miguel Méndez, que es un profesor de ciencias naturales, compartió una convocatoria a su clase para un puesto de asistente de investigación para este proyecto. Entonces, de la breve descripción que estaba envuelta en la convocatoria, yo identifiqué unas palabras que eran de interés para mí, que era ética, leyes y neurociencia. Soy estudiante de biología, pero aspiro a continuar estudios en derecho y llevaba tratando de buscar oportunidades que me permitan como entrelazar lo que estoy aprendiendo en biología, pero también lo que quiero hacer en el futuro. Y como pues muchos de ustedes saben, en nuestro recinto pequeño no hay muchas oportunidades para hacer cosas así, muchos recursos, por lo que pues vi, identifiqué esta oportunidad y dije pues no pierdo nada con, ¿verdad? Con entrevistar, por poner la solicitud. Yo pensaba que yo no tenía la preparación que era necesaria para ocupar el puesto, pero de nuevo me dije que no perdía nada con solicitar. Y qué bueno que lo hice porque una semana después recibí un correo con una invitación formal a ser uno de los 8 fellows de este proyecto. Esta oportunidad me ha llevado a conocer el tema de lo que es la neuroética y el neuroderecho, que son pues dos ramas del montón que vieron en la lista que ahorita se presentó. Y pues justo aquí encontré la manera de entrelazar lo que estoy estudiando versus lo que quiero estudiar en el futuro, pues que estaba buscando. Trabajé como miembro del Comité de Ley y Regulaciones, donde el doctor Shen fue mi mentor, y fui asistente de investigación en lo que es la neuroética, y aquí nos dedicábamos a identificar las implicaciones éticas, legales y sociales de neurotecnologías que estaban en desarrollo. Era parte de un equipo interdisciplinario, o sea, habían estudiantes de derecho en el comité, estudiantes con maestras en bioética, ingenieros, estudiantes de medicina, y algo que pues muchas veces siento era el imposter syndrome que tenía ahí, de que wow, definitivamente tú no tienes la preparación para estar aquí, pero no dejé que eso como que me llegue mucho y continué trabajando y aprendiendo de estos temas, porque si había algo que me decían una y otra vez es que al estos temas ser nuevos, las personas no conocen tanto, no hay un conocimiento muy avanzado, por lo que técnicamente todos estábamos igual en el nivel de desconocimiento. Así que eso me ayudó mucho a estar más tranquila en lo que llevaba trabajando. Pues el 26 de enero de este año tuve la oportunidad de viajar a Boston para participar del Neurotech Justice Summit, que fue un evento que nuestro equipo diseñó, que iba a fines de identificar cómo realmente se sabe si alcanzamos justicia en la disciplina de la neurotecnología. Entonces, o sea, fue una experiencia que como estudiante de biología en este recinto jamás pensé que iba a tener. Más allá, ha sido una experiencia que ha reafirmado mi interés por estudiar Derecho y me ha presentado con la manera ideal para complementar mi background en la ciencia con esta carrera. La neuroética y el neuroderecho son solo una del montón de ramas que existen en neurociencia y sociedad, y hay un sinnúmero de disciplinas que existen para los estudiantes que ahora mismo pueden estar en ciencias políticas. Sé que he visto un par de estudiantes que están aquí presentes que están ahí, en psicología, en humanidades, administración de empresas y de hecho hasta educación. Espero que esta presentación pues les sirva para inculcarle curiosidad del tema. Y quizás hay estudiantes también que son como yo, que están en biología, pero no se quieren ir por las ramas tradicionales de como medicina, farmacia o investigación. Y pues esta presentación quizás les pueda ayudar a introducir nuevas oportunidades de carrera existentes para ustedes. Pues a pesar de haber culminado el proyecto piloto que les había mencionado anteriormente, pues continuó trabajando con el doctor Shen en esta propuesta que es separada, que se titula el Dana Career Network in Neuroscience and Society, y pues la que me ha dado la oportunidad de traerle esta presentación. So, nada, antes de irme, les quiero recordar pues que hay un mundo de carreras arraigada a la ciencia que desconocemos, y podemos pensar que necesitamos tener una preparación como que bien avanzada, que sí, antes de meterme en esta carrera tengo que tener mi bachillerato ahí, o hacer una maestría, esto y aquello, pero realmente pues no es cierto, y lo único que es necesario es tener interés por el tema y estar dispuesto a trabajar, ¿verdad?, duro para alcanzar tus metas. So, también pues nada, antes de dejarlos me quiero hacer disponible que si en algún momento a alguien le interesa conocer más de estos temas o mis propias experiencias, pues me pueden escribir en confianza. Voy a compartir mi correo electrónico por el chat, y nada, espero que les guste mucho la presentación de hoy. Francis, we're good.
Thank you. That was great. So I will introduce my work as well. And but I again want to say, please ask questions now and throughout. Actually, maybe we'll come back to questions. I think let's go through let's kind of walk through the rest, and then we'll take I think a lot of questions. So I will introduce my lab. The Shen Lab at Harvard studies law, ethics, neuroscience, and artificial intelligence. Mostly I'll talk about the neuroscience today. The motto of our lab: every story is a brain story. But there are two other things to say about that. One, every story is not just a brain story, and that's really why we have neuroscience and society. It's also a story of history, politics, sociology, theology. There are many different ways that make up our human stories, but brain science is one of them for sure. And then secondly, right now, every story is a not fully understood brain story. And so there is a lot of uncertainty, and Alyssa sort of referenced some of this. Whether you're in a clinic and you don't know exactly what's going on inside someone's head, are they dead? Are they alive? Or it's in the law. You don't know whether an individual's brain is going to lead them to be violent again or not. And so how do you handle uncertainty when you know something about the brain, but not enough? In our lab, we pursue two questions, and it looks a lot like those arrows you saw before. On one hand, we think about how advances in neuroscience and AI can change the law and policy. There's a lot of ethics involved here. Like, how do you do it ethically? And on the reverse side, we think about law and regulation and how we should govern these new technologies. And that involves a lot of ethics. Also, we do a lot of community engagement, a lot of education and outreach. We collaborate a lot. So we've had over 200 research assistants. I won't go through them all. Maybe you can join our team someday. We publish on a lot of different areas. And we collaborate a lot with groups like the Law and Neuroscience Project, lawneuro.org, another group called the Center for Law, Brain, and Behavior, whose idea is that better decisions aligned with science can produce better outcomes aligned with justice. That's the hope. But I want to say just a few words about this area because it's not all good. Like seems like, oh, great, right? More science, more justice. But it's not always the case. And I want to give you a couple of examples. But first, I want to just really let you know that these things are happening right now. So just rip from the headlines, there's a lot happening in neuromarketing. These are examples just of headlines, how neuromarketing is improving content delivery, how firms are using neuromarketing to improve their advertising hit rates. It's happening in neuropolitics, where they're talking about Brazil or human rights. Do we have a right, and how do we protect our brains, mental privacy? What can explain when leaders lead or don't lead? There's a lot of work in neuroeconomics, trying to understand how do we make economic decisions. You bought something. I know each of you bought something in the last year, many things. Why did you buy the things you bought? Why didn't you buy something else? When did you buy? Those are all brain questions, and then at the macro level, societal questions as well. There's a lot happening in law and neuroscience. Why? Because a lot in law hinges on how brains work, from brain injury and lawsuits to preventing concussions to trying to handle criminal justice. Those are brain questions. Here are a couple of examples just from the last month or so. In the United States, in Pennsylvania, in Pittsburgh, there's a criminal defense happening. There was an individual who did a mass shooting, and tragically created this mass shooting. The defense is going to be that the defendant is a person with schizophrenia, epilepsy, and structural and function impairments of the brain. This is neuroscience in society. It's not a hypothetical. It's a real world case. I don't know if you know the actress Gwyneth Paltrow. She's not as big as she used to be, but she's still pretty big, A-list celebrity. And she had a brain injury case last month where one of the experts was going to show brain images talking about causation. And she won her case, but the victim alleged that she hurt them. Now, this isn't actually new. I can't go through the full history lesson, but I just want you to know that over 100 years ago, things like this were showing up in magazines. Have you a wrong way brain, right? And they were now the technology looks different, but they were doing some of the same sorts of things. Remember I talked about that hype cycle, right? So there have been many moments before where we thought, wow, brain science is going to be the next big thing. And then it kind of wasn't. And so much so that one colleague has said, history has shown us the repeated policy failures of a biologically or brain-based approach to criminal justice and other contexts. And I think a lot of what the new generation, what you may have to confront is, do you make the same mistakes? Do we make the same mistakes as we've done historically, or can we do better? Can we actually advance justice? And I want to give you one example where we didn't advance justice. It has to do with searching for the violent brain. There have been a lot of efforts to cure and define, and I'm putting it in quotes, the violent brain. One book in 2013 did brain scans on those who had committed murder and brain scans on some controls and tried to find the neurobiology of violence. 40 years before, people had tried the same thing, and they used psychosurgery to try and cut out certain sections of the brain. And 40 years before that, so we're going back almost 100 years now, this little device, which was used for the prefrontal lobotomy, I don't know if you've heard of lobotomy, it's no longer used hardly at all, but this won a Nobel Prize, the highest prize. This is the commemorative stamp, right? It's the highest prize you can win. And this was a big deal, and it was really exciting in society. So much so that one group commenting on this is in the Yale Law Journal, thought perfection of so relatively simple and inexpensive a technique as the prefrontal lobotomy promises to be a major contribution to the cure of criminals, right? They thought, boy, we can just start doing lobotomies everywhere. Now, that was a horrible idea. Thankfully, it never took off. It only happened in a few instances. But I give this as an example that just because we're learning new things about the brain, and just because we have new neurotechnology, as Alyssa was talking about, doesn't necessarily mean we're going to do it right. We're going to use it right. That's why there's this intersection of neuroscience and society, because it's not just the scientists and the doctors who are going to make these decisions. It's the lawyers and the ethicists and the business people and the marketers and the educators, right? It's going to be all of us in society. So just to give you a sense of how fast things have moved, 12 years ago, we were trying to get our book published. We've got a law and neuroscience case book, and you have to send it out to reviewers. And here's what some of the reviewers said in trying to tell our publisher, should you publish a book on law and neuroscience? So they said, one of the reviewers said, the topics are so hypothetical that most students will find the course impractical. Most professors are left wondering what, if anything, neuroscience can ever say that's truly useful to the law. Now, they did say maybe it's useful to invest in a cutting edge field, but the point is that it really was not clear that this was going to take off. But what's happened that was 2014 and 2020, about 50%, 45% of this stuff is new just in the last 6 years. And even since we published it, it's been 3 years, things are moving really quickly. So everything's moving fast. 98% of the material in these books did not exist when I graduated college. Okay. That's how fast this stuff is moving. All the indicators are going in this direction. More scholarship, more cases, more legislator about this. We track some of this online. What had once been like a philosophy question, so neurons are the cells in our brain, there are about 80 billion of them. Did my neurons make me do it? Or the magnet, my brain tumor made me do it? Those have now become real world criminal defenses, much more common. And we're also seeing a lot more neuroethics. Neuroethics is really just a practice of asking, why are you doing what you're doing? What are your values? And are we using these new technologies in a way that we think is appropriate? And again, that's a societal question. That's a question, I'm sure some of you are majoring in things like political science or philosophy, or you're taking some ethics courses. Those are places where you have a real say in the matter. And this includes ethical, legal, and social implications, but also questions around justice, equity, diversity, inclusion. Like, who's even involved in these conversations? Do they reflect your communities and your the things that you care about? And if not, I hope you get involved. So as I said, this is happening in neuromarketing. It's the Harvard Business Review. It's happening in neuropolitics. It's happening in neurophilosophy. I use this as an example because if I gave this talk, if Alyssa and I gave this talk a year ago, guess what? We couldn't use this slide because the new neurophilosophy journal was just created in October. It just showed up. These things are that new. They're really just coming on board. So that's kind of some background. Let me say a little bit about what we're trying to do with that career network, and then we'll open it up and we'll just do any discussion that you'd like to do for as long as you want to stay up till the hour. So we're creating a newsletter and a website. The website's going to look like this with events and jobs, resources, and we've got a whole bunch of cool stuff that's going to launch, as I said, in early summer. Attached to that will be a newsletter. So if you signed up for this meeting, we've got your email, we'll put you on that newsletter, and we'll be primarily focusing on opportunities for internships, for reaching out, for finding mentors, this sort of thing. In the fall, our big event will be a virtual career fair. We're going to do it over 4 days in September. You'll all get information about that. Alyssa, we should make sure that some of that programming is bilingual. I hadn't thought of that, but we'll need to do that. And some of our website will be English, Spanish as well. So there'll be some opportunities there. We are doing things like this. So we're having so many great conversations about neuroscience and society with schools across just all over the place. It's wonderful. I'm doing 3 of them today, 2 more after this. And then, as I mentioned before, we're working with organizations who can be partners. That is, groups that work in neuromarketing or neuroethics or neurolaw. We'll be inviting them to to participate in our career fair. And we're excited about that. So this kind of stuff it's not quite ready, but it's coming. All right, I want to say just right before we end, a couple words about like just career building. And this could be true really in any field, like any field, but I'll make it specific to neuroscience and society. So of course, at the bottom of the pyramid is the big question, like, what do you want to do when you grow up? Who do you want to be when you grow up? If you have an answer to that question, which you might not yet, but if and when you do, you would develop some skills, right, in those areas, get the right sorts of training, whether it's formal education or internships or practical experience. And that comes here, right? There's a lot of networking involved in order to get there. You finally find some job that you want, you have to apply. And you need a job, right? The pyramid has to end in a job unless you're independently wealthy. I'm not. So I've always needed a job. I presume you need a job too. And is there a job that you can get that has some meaning to you? If it's in this zone, does it involve some of these areas? But can it also be a job where, you pay off your student loans and you have a work-life balance and do all the family things you might want to do? Now, sometimes we think about this pyramid as going like this. Oh, I figure this out and then I do this. This very linear process. That's not really how things work, in large part because it's like you have hard choices to do. Like you might be interested in a lot of different things, right? So just in this zone, for example, you want to be an attorney, a scientist, a physician, a researcher, a teacher, and any number of other things. And guess what? You don't know. And here's the other thing. You're not going to know until you've experienced it. And so, in fact, the arrow points back down this way, because you can't answer the, like, what do I want to be when I grow up question unless you've tried it out. It's like a new food. It's like, do you like, this type of food? Well, I don't know. I have to try it, right? And that's the sometimes the cycle here, where the jobs say, we don't want you unless you have some experience. Be like, how am I going to get some experience unless you let me try it, right? And how am I going to know what I like unless I try it? So these are the sorts of things that we'll try and address a little bit as well in our work. I'll say, and we can talk about it now as well if you want to. But this networking piece is really big, because that's sort of the secret sauce to try and get in without experience. And we can talk about that, right? Okay, so these are the sorts of things that we hope to put up on the website. I've mentioned already the sorts of resources that we're going to have. I'll put Renee's email into the chat, but you already are on the email list if you signed up for this Zoom, and we hope you'll get involved, whether it's just reading the emails or coming to events, or more directly getting involved in some of the work that we or others are doing. So a stop there. I think we're in pretty good shape. We've left enough time, Alyssa, for questions. But before we go into questions, anything else, Alyssa, you want to say about any of that, or?
Not really. Everything's great. So
Okay.
far.
Okay. So let's open it up. If anyone wants to have questions, if you want to type your questions, you want to talk about your questions, this is an open session for doing that. We've got about 20, 25 minutes if we need it, and we can talk about anything that you'd like to. And again, questions can come in Spanish or English, whatever you feel more comfortable with.
I want to go ahead and break the ice. So I'd love if you could share a couple of words about advice for students that are trying to network. I know that we're gonna kind of facilitate that when we launch our website, but for example, students in UPR Aguadilla, we're not really as connected, let's say, to when compared to other how do we say the other campuses at UPR. So what would be a good way for us to get involved?
That's a very good question. I want to turn it around. I want to ask you as well what you think about it, but I will say a couple words, and I would like to know what you think. So I think that I would take heavy advantage of the opportunities, that new opportunities over the last few years that present themselves because of the advent of the virtual event and Zoom. So it used to be that pre-COVID, there were very, very limited opportunities to have distance engagement around these sort of little fields. That's changed. So I would encourage, so one concrete thing you can do is, if you get interested in some area and you want to learn a little bit more about it, is you can attend a virtual event, and at that virtual event, then immediately, either during the event, if there's an opportunity for open chat conversation, or afterwards, but even better during the event, just track down this person or people that you want to network with. And it's the equivalent of going up to someone after they talk and meeting them in person. So that's one very concrete thing. Okay, the second is, and this is a networking 101. So it's really not specific at all to law or to neuroscience or to neuroscience and society. But what happens when you send an email to someone that you don't know is, what typically happens is that person is going to default to not answering it and to just maybe forwarding it to their assistant or something. That's what I do. There are too many. I get too many emails. So, and Renee is not on this call, but she knows this because I put her email put in the chat. She gets my emails and I say, let's write a nice email back, but I just don't have time. My reaction is very different if that email comes from a colleague of mine or a friend, and they say, could you talk with so-and-so? And then I'll say, oh, great, sure, I'm happy to do that. So if at all possible, you also want to build your network of mentors Those could be professors. They don't have to be professors. They could be. They could be other trusted advisors. And then you lean on them to help you sort of do the introduction. It's kind of like if you're at a party and you look across, I want to meet that person, and your friend says, "Oh, I'll introduce you." If you can have somebody introduce you, that's even better, especially if that someone knows the person. And I'll tell you why certain people have certain advantages in this world, because the number one thing that I respond to is my mom. If my mom sends me an email and says, "I met this person, will you talk with them?" I always say yes, because it's my mom, right? And so that creates a systemic bias, though, because families are not, just the way it is no, my mom, was the first in her family to go to college. She's not that well connected. But the point is that these networks become pretty insular pretty quickly, right? If you respond, and everyone here do the same thing, right? If your friend, your buddy, or your family member asks you to do something, you're much more likely to do it than anybody else. And it's the same way with professional networking. So one is you create your own new connections, okay? And two is you use your existing connections to help you out. And sometimes that's luck, just finding someone on campus, a great professor, an advisor. But it does mean more, and you're more likely to get a response if you can have them do the introduction for you. And the third thing is, we are trying, Alyssa, you mentioned this, we are trying to set up these specific networking events. So the way these events in the fall are going to work is like an hour of, kind of general background, and then an hour of breakout rooms where you can just go, like a career fair in person. You go to like booth to booth or table to table. You could go breakout room to breakout room. And the whole point is kind of like speed dating for neuroscience and society. So those are three things I'd say concretely. But Alyssa, I'm wondering what you think. You talked about this a little bit already, but yeah, what do you think? You've been very successful at networking, actually, here. That's why we're talking now. Are there lessons you've learned more? I know you've talked about it already, but anything else you'd want to say?
I'd say so a lot of a lot of students or close friends, they've asked me like, "Oh, how did you find the opportunity?" And just like, for example, when I started as a fellow in our Dana Center proposal, and I like, initially I would just say luck because I had no like explanation. I mentioned when I was talking to the group that I found out about the opportunity because a professor shared it, but he wasn't even my professor. So I found out because of a friend who shared that this professor had this opportunity. And really, so that made me question, what was it like? Was it just like luck or fate that led me to apply and get the position? But then I realized like my past trajectory, the fact that I had gotten so involved in school projects and student council, a lot of leadership experience, that made me like more and more open to signing up for these activities or events. So I feel like even if our campus is quite small, we don't have as much resources to maybe get involved in very specialized things like, let's say, neurolaw or neuroethics, but trying to get involved in like other chances that I have kind of made me more and more open to how do I say this? Made me more likely to be prepared for whatever life would throw at me next. So I was more willing to say yes. And I feel like that's kind of what I could maybe as advice, just take everything that comes to your way that you feel like could help you in the future for a potential job. And I don't know if that helps too much, or if I even did a good job articulating it, but
Yeah, I think
yeah.
so. It's very unpredictable, you know. If you had, I could have talked more about my own story, but if I listed 1,000 careers that I would have when I graduated college, this would not be on that list. So, because this new thing showed up, and there was a lot of luck involved, actually, certainly for me, and I think for many people. So I do think luck or fate or whatever you want to call it, but so you don't control everything, but at the same time, you're pointing out that you were prepared to take advantage of the application. For instance, I'll say one other concrete thing. This is not specific to this, is have a resume ready. So because often you may learn of an opportunity on Friday and the deadline is Monday, which is a problem if you've never prepared your resume. But it's not a problem if you've been working on that resume and it's ready to go and you can just send it, or you already have written a cover letter for something else. And so you just change the cover letter a little bit, right? Those are things that you can control, those things, so that you're ready. And then opportunity comes along. Okay, so we have some questions starting to come in. One question is, does everyone in the lab have a biology background, required level of knowledge? That's a great question, and I'll answer it even more broadly. So what backgrounds are required for these different fields? And I think the answer is it really depends on what aspect of neuroscience and society you want to explore. In general, I would say the following holds. Either people they have a specialty in the non-neuro area, but they become familiar enough with neuroscience, or they've got a lot of expertise in the science and they become familiar with the other areas. So for example, somebody may be a trained economist or a trained marketer or a trained lawyer, and they realize, boy, this neuroscience might be really important for me. I'm going to learn more about neuroscience. I'm not going to become a neuroscientist. I'm not going to become a physician. I'm not going to become a healthcare provider. I'm going to remain a marketer or an economist or a lawyer or a judge or a teacher, but I might change the way I do things a little bit. I might harness new tools and I might collaborate with scientists. Okay, so that'd be one example. The flip side is you're a neuroscientist or you've been studying neuroscience. Like, boy, I know a lot about the neuroscience of addiction, but I don't want to do research on addiction. I want to go into marketing. And turns out that understanding the neurocircuitry of addiction and how we make decisions can be really good in marketing, or could be very important in public health if you want to design a better public health response to substance use disorder. So to me, the answer is typically you have like a primary thing and then a secondary thing. Now, some people have two primary things and they spend a ton of their time in school, but most people pick one and then become, a little bit in the other. And in our lab, we have all examples of that. So we have, we have medical students, we have law students, we have PhD students, we have undergrads, we have some undergrads who majored in, Alyssa, is your major political science, or no, you're biology, but you've taken some political science or something there, yeah. But we have others who are majored in philosophy, majored in, all sorts of different things. So there does have to be some familiarity with the brain. But I'm an example. My training is all in the social sciences, but that's fine because I collaborate with others. I would describe, I don't know what movies you all like, but one of the types of movie genres I like are when these movies where they have the big teams and they're going to like rob a bank or something. And when you do that, like you have to have all these different, there's somebody who's going to drive the getaway car and somebody who's really good at picking the lock and somebody who's really good at like the mastermind. And so you kind of have to have all the different parts. No single individual could possibly have enough knowledge to do these things. These are fields that involve teams. And also, I would add, relevant for our conversation at this group, is that you also you would want to have the requisite community engagement and cultural awareness for the area that you're working in. And maybe as we go through this, I'll even pull up a couple of those slides to give an example of what community engagement looks like in this space. But I would say that a lot of different backgrounds can work, but that you just have to be willing to go a little bit beyond your comfort zone. And also your academic background, you can gain experience. You don't have to take a class in it. So that sometimes when you're in school, you feel like the only way to learn, I think sometimes it feels like, is through, did I take a class in it? But you don't necessarily have to take a class in it. You can instead what you can do is get real world experience, and that's another thing. So, well, I'm going to show this slide just really quickly about community engagement. So community, and this is kind of a short version of a longer talk I could give, but community engagement is the idea that rather than just quote unquote experts, getting together and making decisions, that you're co-creating solutions with members of the community. There are better and worse ways to do community and participant engagement. So the best practice is really robust, thoughtful engagement, from the beginning to the end. The worst is like not to do it at all. And there's a concerning version, which is like cover or checkbox. You just, oh, we had one meeting with them. Yeah, it's like if we were going to introduce, I think the campus equivalent would be, let's say that your administration is going to introduce a new policy around student life. They could do it by really engaging with you and meeting with you from the beginning. They could ignore you completely, or they could have like, oh, come to the president's office. We're going to have a meeting with you. And they have a meeting with you, but then they completely ignore everything you say and they just do what they were going to do anyway. Okay. So number 2 and number 3 are bad. We're trying in our work to really do number 1. Alyssa, where are you seated? Where are you seated here? Oh, right there in the front. There you are. So this is our community engagement, or part of it. But we were out in the Museum of Science, with individuals. We worked with a community organization playing this game about neurofutures. And so we would look at, these are kids, young adults, like 18 to 24, your age. And they've all been involved with the criminal justice system, or most have, or have housing insecurity. And we did this exercise where we also created a report card for the developers of these technologies. And like, okay, what do we want to ask them? And one of the most interesting things and important things is we asked also, right, who do you trust to fill out the report card? Okay. And the most common answer was, we don't trust anyone. Who do you trust to answer these questions? And, for good reasons. So, we're doing a lot of work to try and, won't go into the details, but like to improve community engagement. And I mention all that because some of the expertise that you may offer may be community and local knowledge, right? Is to bridge the science and the ethics to a local community, because the answer and the solution and what you want to do won't be the same in Boston as it will be in your community, or won't be the same even in different communities in Boston. So I think that's another type of expertise that maybe isn't listed sometimes, but should be, and all of you would be able to bring that as well. Okay, other questions, other thoughts, anything else while we're here?
Yeah, I had a question.
Yes. Good morning.
Hello, good morning, and thank you for offering this conference. It was very interesting.
Okay, also, what is your background, your student? What are you studying?
I'm a biology major.
Okay, great. What year are you?
4th year.
Okay, congratulations. You're almost done.
Thank you.
Huh?
Thank you. Yeah, almost.
Okay, all right. So yeah, what do you want to talk about?
Yeah, so my question was pertaining to the pyramid that you showed earlier. It's just that I usually have this recurring conversation with my friends that once we like go into our major, we didn't really know what to expect, and that we really just like find out throughout our major what we really get ourselves into.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that if we want to tackle this this lack of knowledge of what fields really entail, I wanted to ask you, what would you suggest if we could maybe do that at an early level, maybe instruct teachers at a high school level for them to teach their students in order to like create a better acknowledgement of what these fields entail? Because for me, at least, I didn't really know what research was. I didn't know what physicians did, or even, right, I didn't even know what was neurotech or neurojustice. Maybe I found out like a year ago. And so these fields, so far into my undergrad degree, I think that they could get like a better exposure, but maybe a better decision making at in principle could be done like at a high school level. And I thought that I wanted to ask you if getting involved with high school students and teaching them about these topics was an effort that would be productive, or would it be deemed too early for them to really consider that as a future career?
What a great question. So I think it's not too early at all. If we had more, we scoped this particular project. So we have a 1-year grant from the Dana Foundation, and we don't have a lot of money, but we have some. And there was actually a conversation at the start about what level are we going to start at. And it was really just a resource constraints that took us to the college level. And so, what we're doing is that we have this list of, I don't know, 700, 800 colleges. And our team is going to each website and kind of scouring that website to find the organizations or the groups or the individuals who might be interested. And then we reach out to them. And we just started there, but it would be, I think, great if the foundation would support expanding into high school. They already do work in high school with Brain Awareness Week to get people generally involved with the brain. And so it would be a natural tag on to do that. And I think something, you should be on the panel, something like what I wish I knew, 3 years ago type thing, I think is there. And I think that's generally true outside of neuroscience and society. So I think research, probably, you mentioned that. That's real. I think most of these fields, I teach a law also. So I teach a undergraduate course, or I have, I guess, at the University of Minnesota. We have 150 students, and it's called Introduction to American Law. And what we do in that class is introduce students not to like the 3 branches of government, that sort of thing. Like, what does it actually mean? Like, what do you do as a lawyer? And it turns out that nobody knows what you do as a lawyer, because the only thing people have seen are the movies, which isn't great. It's not really what most lawyers do. And so I think things like that are really important. And I think they absolutely could happen at the earlier stages. And I'll tell you, this is where there's another systemic bias, that it is happening at early stages. It's just only happening with really elite places. So there are high school kids that come to Harvard campus every summer for camps that are, and summer experiences that are like on these topics, like not specific neuroethics, but things like it. And I have a high school student in the lab, actually. My first ever high school student I was willing to hire, because I never thought it would work, but she's been great. But, she got lucky and was exposed to this through her school. So the point is that she can handle it, and other high school students can handle it. And frankly, we need their input, because if we're developing law and policy for 16-year-olds, which we are, by the way, wouldn't it be important to hear from 16-year-olds? I think so. So I really think it's a great point. I think that it's a blind spot. And I would hope, I don't know that we will be the vehicle for it, though I guess, Alyssa, you could take a note. We could at least do a big something or other, because there are efforts that I'm not as familiar with that are trying to do it. But I think it's a great point. I will also say, though, that I think sometimes it gets to the end of college and it feels like you've already made your choices. I know somebody, I wish I majored in this or done this, or but if you take a longer view, it's like you are still, even once you've graduated or you're towards the end of college. One, you're in the privileged, anyone on this call, if you're in school, you're very privileged. There are mothers who we always find someone who's more privileged than us. Okay, fine. But the vast majority of the world doesn't get the opportunities that you do. So you have that already. Secondly, it is not too late to completely change or to slightly alter trajectories. Many students do this. People switch mid-career, after 10 years as one career, like, I'm changing careers. And that has never been, more fluid than now, So if you get excited about this stuff, I hope one of the messages here is, whatever you have right now, that's fine. There's no prerequisite. It's just like the main prerequisite is a willingness and interest to work hard and to make some connections. But Raphael, great point. Maybe you'll follow up and you'll help us do that panel in the fall. Over the summer, we're going to try and create more panels. Okay, a couple more questions. This is good. So one is about careers, communications, integrating neuro and these specialties, clinical psychology. Not necessarily. So thanks, Sophia, for your question. And I guess this should also be said and more explicitly, although a lot of the stuff I was talking about today were these intersections of fields, most careers don't need to have those intersections at all. So be an awesome clinical psychologist, you don't have to engage with the law really much at all. Or be an excellent science communications and journalist. There you'll branch out and read about different areas, but or just be an excellent lawyer, and do corp. And I know this is not your path, but maybe somebody else is going to be an excellent lawyer, or excellent heart physician, or excellent community, youth mentor. All those things are. My view is that the brain is always in the background somewhere, because as I said at the outset, at least my bias is thinking that every story is a brain story, and that every engagement you have, including, by the way, your deepest, most intimate relationships, are brain relationships. So in my house, we always laugh on Valentine's Day, because my kids know that first thing I tell them is that the heart pumps blood, which it does. Okay, so as a metaphor, that's fine. You can have a heart-to-heart conversation in the matter of the heart, but that's all your brain. If the next time somebody says you can choose with your heart or your head, they're really asking, you can choose with one circuit in your head or a different circuit in your head. Your heart's pumping blood is really important to facilitate the way your mind works. But anyway, so I think my answer would be, I don't necessarily recommend integrating neurolaw into those specialties, but some versions of those careers could intersect the law, could intersect neuroethics, and in those cases, yeah, it makes sense, but not necessarily. And then, so neuroscience and education. This is thank you, Lucas, for your question. So this is a really interesting area. I'm glad you raised it. We're basically out of time, but I'll just say this. So I'll put it in the chat. The buzzwords are educational neuroscience, or they call it mind-brain behavior. And if you Google those things, you'll find these entire fields. In a nutshell, there's been a hype cycle around these things. So initially the thought was, oh, wow, we are going to totally revolutionize education, because we finally realized about we're looking at young people's brains, and you mentioned technology, let's harness technology. And then I'm giving you kind of a really quick overview. So like, well, wait a second. Is neuroscience really offering us anything we didn't already know? Like, it's good to have a stable family home and less trauma, and it's good to have, clear expectations. And are we fundamentally changing the way we teach reading and writing? And, so yes and no. I will say one place that's been really interesting, two places actually, I guess, investment in early childhood education. So and this is a place where economics, Nobel Prize winning economist, and neuroscience have come together they talk about the first 1,000 days, and even prenatal, so in the womb. We have learned so much about brain development. It doesn't mean that those first 5 years are destiny, but boy, the way that, and you're not even aware of this, the way that your neural circuitry is forming, and those first 5 years is incredibly important. And so that implicates education, it implicates policy, politics, investment, right? How do we create a society that recognizes these things? Because you can't see them yet, right? You just see, oh, a cute little 2-year-old, right? But that cute little 2-year-old has now had 700 plus days of brain development. And what we are able to see through new neurotechnology is how those circuits are wiring. And there's a phrase, circuits that fire together, wire together. And the point is that as you begin to develop, certain things get more hardwired, not fully hardwired, but more hardwired than before. Language, actually, I'll end where I started, is a great example, right? So, why wasn't I able to speak in Spanish today, or Portuguese, or Mandarin, or something else? It's not because I was born with an English-speaking brain. I wasn't. I was born with a brain that was formed in its environment, right? And the environment that I was formed in, spoke more English. And so the same can be said for other types of cognitive abilities, and ways of engaging with others. So great question. It deserves a whole nother day. And we're going to have a career network day around, it's going to include educational neuroscience, mind-brain behavior. The best volume on this I read is Educational Neuroscience, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And that could be said for all of the things we talked about today. There's an awesome version of this. There's like an version of this, and there's a really bad injustice version of all these things. And I'd leave you with this message. I hope you get involved, because if you don't get involved, you know where these trajectories are heading. Big companies big neuro will take over. You won't have the sorts of protections you want. You won't have the flourishing you want. You certainly won't have the distribution and access of these things. I think that's fair to say. So, Elisa, do you want to say anything else, and we can close it out? I know people have to get on with their things.
No, I would just love to say thank you to everyone for being here, and I hope that this conversation got you maybe excited and curious about what we have to offer. And to those of you who know me, feel free to let me know what you thought about this presentation. To those who don't, still find me and let's have a conversation about this. So that's all. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much. We'll be in touch. So